Welcome to Grow Organically, the podcast where we host candid discussions with wealth management and financial pros. Each episode, we break down factors that drive growth at wealth management firms and how organizations can continue to be forward thinkers in today's competitive landscape. Grow Organically is brought to you by Catchlight. You can access all our podcasts, including show notes and other resources to keep learning, at catchlight.ai. Dan Gilmartin is the host of Grow Organically and is the head of marketing at Catchlight.
Welcome back to the program, everybody. I'm your host, Dan Gilmartin. Thrilled to have my friend Jamie Hopkins on the program today. A little bit of background on Jamie. He's the Chief Wealth Officer at WSVS, and as well is the CEO of Bryn Capital Management. In the past, prior roles, he was the Managing Director of Wealth Solutions at Carson Group. He's the founder and president of the FinServe Foundation. And something I didn't know, but discovered recently, is a finance professor at Creighton University. Jamie, welcome to the program.
Hey, Dan, it's great to see you. Thanks for having me on today.
Awesome. Hey, just for background for the listeners, would love to hear a little bit about how you got into this role, a little bit more about your background, your path to wealth management.
Yeah, it's a fun story. It's always hard to pick what spot you start at when you tell your past. And currently, as you mentioned, I really have two main roles here at our organization. So leading the Bryn Mawr Trust, wealth businesses. So we do a lot of work with other financial advisors and firms helping on the trust side. That's been core to our business for a long time. And then sit as the Chief Wealth Officer of WSVS, which is our publicly traded organization. It's a regional bank. We're based out of the city of Wilmington, Delaware. Interestingly enough, we were actually a couple of months older than the city itself. So we're 192 years old, which is a really impressive thing.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's a fun fact about it I thought was really interesting because it's WSVS Savings Fund Society, or Wilmington Savings Fund Society. And I was like, well, how do we have the Wilmington name before the city of Wilmington? So I had to go do some research on that. But I grew up in Baltimore, and neither one of my parents graduated college. And, like a lot of people's story about their money and finance, it does start with family. So my dad passed away when I was 8 years old. He was a construction worker, went up on a job site, was doing roofing, gutters, and in Baltimore it was winter, it rained, and aluminum ladders freeze over faster than the roof was coming down, slipped, fell, and passed away. I've got four sisters. My mom continued to run that business, but for me, that moment was, not only the loss of my father, but in my view, right, the loss of the income for our household. And so for an 8-year-old, it was very scary. And that was really, to a large extent, my first relationship with money was, that stress and trauma that occurred. So it developed a little bit of a scarcity mindset around money and wealth with me at that time. Interestingly enough, it's not my mom's experience because she was running a business with her spouse and she'd had other experiences before. She believed in herself as an entrepreneur, which is often the entrepreneur's journey. And so she actually knew she was going to take care of all of us and find a way forward. And so, fast forward, almost 40 years, she's still running that business. She's getting close to retirement now. Probably in the next 2 years or so, I think she'll wrap it up. But she's given us all great opportunities and is such a success story. So my past later on in life, I was like, how do I help people like my mom and my dad get access to financial advice? And I know I misuse this term in this, but it's one that we use, is that democratize advice. Really, how do I get advice out to people like my parents, to service members and trade services that don't typically fall into our traditional advice channels? And that's been a big goal of mine. So it's taken me through academia, my own company I ran for 7 years, off to Carson to head up the Wealth Solutions and eventually be head of Carson Wealth for a couple years. And then more recently here at Bryn Mawr Trust and WSVS to really lead up the local, impact here of our planning and embedded in the community. We do a lot of give back, which also brought me into FinServe. And that's more or less my story. It's what drives me is my mom. That's my why story. So as I tell people, how do I do all the things I do? It's because I wake up every day. I'm never going to dislike my mom. I'm always going to love her. So she's a great motivation to do more, impact more people.
Love it. Love the, bringing the family into the background here and the motivation behind it, Jamie. Love the story. So let's jump in. So we're talking about organic growth here. You sit in an interesting position between these two organizations, WSVS and Bryn Mawr Trust. Would love to learn a little bit about how you, within that role, are identifying new wealth clients. We'll talk in a minute about crossover. But really, as you think about a client on the trust side, on the banking side, what are you doing? How are you identifying those that might be interested in a wealth financial planning business?
It's a great question. Every organization out there in the wealth world, I believe, is hyper focused or trying to be focused on organic growth. The reality is, if we can't find new people to serve, right, eventually you decline down, right? I mean, your clients will retire, they'll pass away, you'll get smaller, so you have to be able to add new clients and serve more people over the long run. Some people go inorganic too to kind of add more to that, but I think organic growth is still by far and away the best way to grow. It's also your natural network, right? It's like who is coming to you because they love you and you have a right to win and to serve in that area. I'll weave some things in from Carson here too, because there's a very different perspective from my time spent there in building out the organic growth engine versus here. But here, WSVS is embedded into the community, right? It's a regional bank. We serve this region. We serve the small businesses in this area. For the state of Delaware, we're the largest small business bank in the areas. And I think we're fifth overall when you add in New Jersey, Wilmington area, Delaware, and southeastern Pennsylvania. But this is our area. So we live here. Our neighbors are here. Our kids go to school here. And that's a little bit different of a mindset when you serve and live in the community. And there's no fallback area, right? There's not a secondary market you go to. And so we really do think about our ROI, not just in terms of number of households served, number of clients served, new clients, but also we track, how many new jobs do we help set up through our efforts, both on the wealth and lending and deposit side for new businesses that start in this area. And that's important to us. But when we approach it, probably not too shocking for you, is we really do think about serving a broad range of customers in this area and clients, from financial planning only clients that really are just getting started in their journey. And so that's a delivery of ours. We still have brokerage accounts for people with small assets that come into a branch location and want to be served and want to roll something over, get some planning advice. And so we've built out a capability for that, up to the traditional RIA model, then out to family office model. So we really can, interestingly enough, serve from a college kid's first bank account all the way to billionaire clients in the family office. And we're focused on this region, though. I mean, that is our area. So it's business owners, executives, people at our school, teachers, nonprofits, everybody in this space. And that can be a little challenging because as you think about it, you hear people like my good friend Michael Kitces talk about having a niche area. And to some degree, our niche area is just location, right? It's where we sit. It's not necessarily only doctors or only professional fishermen. It is people who live in this region.
Well, niche can be a geo, sure.
It can, yeah.
Yeah. Talk to us a little bit more about that cross-sell. So you've got the banking side of the business. You've got deposit accounts and things like that. How do you think about identifying individuals on that side of the business that might be good wealth prospects for you?
Yeah, the cross-sell or just, the holistic service model, I think, is a better way to think about it, right? Is how do we service the client's whole needs? And, that leads to cross-sell opportunities from a financial standpoint, but it's really that service mindset. We do view ourselves as a high service organization. Our tagline is literally, we stand for service, which also matches up with the WSFS. But you see that, and we celebrate service moments across the organization. Our CEO, Roger, celebrates those. So it is usually starting with that, like, what does the person need? So understanding those goals and aspirations. And I always add the aspirations mark in, because sometimes goals are, very specific and short-sighted. We always talk about goals like they're, always big picture, but sometimes goals can just be like, I just want to get through the day. Like, okay, that's a goal, but it's not necessarily like life-changing goal. Like you were probably going to make it through the day, whether or not you set that as your goal. But the aspirations to me are really important. So who do you aspire to be? What's the impact you want to leave? Or, what are you trying to do for your kids or the generation after that? And then that can help us with the planning. Interestingly enough, I'll give that plug. I think just this last Monday, we did roll out Catchlight here, which is a great, great service and tool. And we are using that to say, hey, look, we've got all these banking clients, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of banking clients that we don't work with from a wealth perspective. Who really would benefit from this, and kind of working through that organization. We do have private banking here too, which is also one of the areas that we help service people. So private bankers really sit in this interesting area where they spend a lot of time with clients. They understand where they're going. They understand their business, how they're leveraged, and they can, kind of connect other pieces. So we use our private bankers here really as that connection point to all other services. So whether it's setting up a new retirement plan for them, whether it's getting a trust set in place, working with, the tax team and doing tax filing and tax prep, or traditional wealth offering. It's really their job to be that connector across everything, because they ultimately develop this really close relationship. And, sometimes it's amazing that people in the private banking team, they might have been their private banker through 3 or 4 different banks over the years, right? As you know, in the banking world over the last 30 years, there's been a tremendous amount of consolidation, especially through the great financial crisis. So these people follow those relationships. I mean, it is a relationship business, and great people create great companies. So we try to lean into the great people we have to understand the clients best, and that's how we get our services out there. But that's really how we're approaching it. We think there's a huge opportunity there in our franchise value. WSVS acquired Bryn Trust about 2 years ago, really to enter the wealth space here outside of the Philadelphia market. And, kept the brand, kept the name, kept all that history, because they truly believe in the brand of Bryn Trust and what it's done for 123 years. And so we've actually rebranded all of our wealth businesses now under the Bryn Trust brand and leaned into that, because it's amazing when you think about 123 years of serving the wealth world. Is really fantastic.
Yeah, it's amazing. By the way, thank you for the plug on Catchlight. Didn't need to mention that, but appreciate that. And I deeply appreciate the service model that you guys offer in terms of how you approach your clients, as well as the breadth of services that you provide. The holistic view of the financial success and financial future of your clients, pretty critical. Love how you guys have structured that, and that legacy.
Yeah, 192 years at WSVS, and yeah,
pretty amazing. So let's shift gears a little bit, because you talked a little bit about some of your wealth management advisors. As we look at the definition of organic growth, it's effectively new assets from net new clients and new assets from existing clients. You and I had a conversation a while back about wallet share expansion, and I think this is a fascinating area. We talk about how big of an opportunity it is. I think some of the general stats out there is that the average advisor manages somewhere around 40 to 50% of their clients' total assets. Would love to understand how big of a focus this is for you on your wealth management side of your business today.
It's a huge focus for me, and I have the same mindset as you, and we've talked about this. And if you start diving into the stats, you do see that. And the custodians, right, they have a good view of that often, about how much an advisor is really managing. And to me, when I was running Carson Coaching, we were working with about 1,400 advisory firms at any given time. And I kept hearing the same thing. Well, I don't know how much we should really spend on wild share capture. I think we manage almost everything. And I used to just always think, I'm like, you might be less than 40 then. If you think you manage all of it, you might even be lower. And, there's a huge opportunity there, because look, a lot of those clients, they're your best supporters. They're your super fans. And in some cases, it's just because you haven't asked the right questions about where the assets are. And they don't think about it in those terms, right? They hired you to offboard this, there's an account sitting over here, that was at an old employer. Maybe they rolled it over somewhere. Maybe they just left it there. But they're kind of coming to you for that advice. So that ability to aggregate that, to ask the right questions is really important. So to me, great way to add value is to get those tax returns. I am a big believer. I know we've talked about this before, Dan, too, in that holistic approach, bolt-on services, tax planning, tax filing, trust services. But if you don't want to go that far down the road, look at some of these softwares that are out there. They're pulling in this like a holistic plan and doing the tax analysis.
I love connecting the dots between the tax planning, tax prep, even a CPA, and understanding what may be beyond the scope of the current relationship. And as stated with your service model, this is such a relationship business. And so I want to transition to that a little bit and just talk about the nature of how you are thinking about building the wealth business as a relationship business. You had said something to me, and I was kind of surprised by the stat, but that if a client can't drive and see their advisor within 45 minutes, they're probably not going to win that business. Distance is a factor. And you're a regional brand, so I think geo as your niche, super important. Tell us a little bit more about that relationship from a geo perspective.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And funny enough, I learned that not from here. I was working with Bain Capital and Boston Consulting Group when we kind of figured that out. So we built out a really large client acquisition engine out there where we're spending $20 million a year generating new clients. And in mass, what we learned was if they couldn't drive to the advisor, the close rate went almost down to nothing. Mm-hmm. Now, I always like to bring up a couple caveats about this because obviously there are remote advisory offerings. In those worlds, though, people are self-selecting into a fully remote offering. So you are by default picking up the people who are already okay with this, and so you're able to close them.
Yeah. And by the way, do you think this has changed with COVID?
No, so this actually was post-COVID.
Okay.
Like this was 22 and 23. So everybody tells me that the world changed. Yeah. And the other funny thing is a lot of these people believe they had remote advisors, but they still wanted to be near them. And it was one of the biggest takeaways. I was actually in Tulsa, Arizona, talking to somebody, and they had an advisor there. They had never been to see the advisor, but they knew they sat in Tulsa and like they had only met with them remotely, but they knew they were in the same city. And I found that so fascinating, and that was appealing to them, although they never wanted to meet. They didn't want to go into the office, right? This wasn't like one day I want to, they're like, no, I don't want to go into the office, but I know where their office is. Like I've driven by it, and that was appealing to them. So there's some aspect of trust that foundationally comes up still around financial advice and advisors, that this local feel, the ability to see an office, it's like it's real. Because if everything's kind of like magic ones and zeros in the coding on my screen, I probably lose some of that trust factor. And that still seems to be a really big deal. So I believe in, presence of locations. You can see this some very large players, Chase, massive player in our, world from a banking perspective. They announced this summer all the new branches that they're opening across the country. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because everybody's been saying, yeah, branches are dead. People don't want to go in. But they've actually found a similar thing, is that unless they kind of can be seen in a community, you don't think about them as the community bank. And they've really tried to lean in under Chase as that community bank for business owners. So they're steering into that local feel, smaller offices, smaller branches in the area. I do believe, and I think we talked about this once before too, is that the strategic convergence of what wealth firms offer today, at least in my lifetime in this business, going back 18 years, we've really converged. We look the most alike that we ever have at any other point in my time here. Technology's allowed for that. There used to be more proprietary tech, and that created some difference, or proprietary investments that created a difference. Well, that's kind of changed, right? Like we're using less and less proprietary tech. We're using less and less proprietary investments. Both of those are becoming more and more commoditized, and you can launch a updated wealth tech stack I revamped ours in 10 months here.
Wow.
I told people when I came in, I said, I think we're 7 years behind. I said, the good news is you can get caught up in a year or two now. Probably if you're starting from scratch, you might be able to do it in 6 months or even less. So that has fundamentally changed. Now, what's the difference between firms? It's you, it's me, it's the advisor that's meeting with somebody, their care factor, their trust level. That is the one big difference that still sits out there, is the individual advisor, the talent that is sitting across from clients. And so I think service is at a premium in that regard. I think we still need more great advisors to come into this business. And what you're seeing over this past year is, I guess it's probably, I don't want to use that word, but like there's a fight for talent, I guess is the best way to put it, right? Like
I think it's a battle.
Yeah, a battle. A fight. There is, and you're seeing that more and more prevalent than at any time before. And the reason that I really believe that is that's the last differentiating factor. It's not a fight over tech or your investment strategy anymore. Like anybody, if you show me your investment strategy, I can have my team mimic that in 12 hours, and they can come back and say we could run the same portfolio that you had, right? Like direct indexing makes that really easy, right? I could mimic almost any strategy out there in a couple of minutes. It's not hard. And that's being a little bit, tongue in cheek, but generally speaking, yeah, it's not as valuable as it used to be. And so talent is the key differentiator. And I think great organic growth firms today have great talent. They train them, they pay them right, they let them service clients. And those are the firms that are winning today.
And I suspect they're giving them the tools to enable that growth. So with that, a closer question for you, Jamie. So if you knew then what you know now, take all the knowledge that you've gathered in the last 5 years and transport yourself back 5 years, and you're the chief wealth officer at WSVS. What are you going to tell yourself to do and focus on with respect to organic growth?
With organic growth, it really is that getting everybody on a more similar process around onboarding clients and those early questions. When I see people who don't grow as well as others, I don't think that they have great conversations. I don't think they ask great questions. I think they go in and talk and present too much versus learning from the clients on where they are. And this is just psychology. You ask more questions to somebody, you're liked more. Like that's, that's just the reality of the world. And I still see that across the board in this industry. Advisors talk too much, use too much jargon, don't follow a consistent process of asking questions and building the relationship. And, I think that's foundational. And I think that there are places growing tremendously well today that have poor technology experiences, poor CX experiences, poor investment experiences, but they are really good at connecting with the clients on a human level. And I think that is the single most important thing we need to do. I did believe before that if we had the best investments and the best technology and all those things, you would grow regardless of how good all the advisors were and how well trained they were and how well they connected. And I don't believe that anymore. I believe you need that. And now I see it more and more occurring. The Betterment, John was a good friend of mine who launched Betterment. And what you've seen there is they become more and more like an advisory firm every day. They've added CFPs, they've added that touch point. They're servicing advisors now actually really well in some areas, and they've rolled out retirement plan solutions. And they made it all about the person, even though they were supposed to be this robo-advisor that was going to replace the person. They now support the advisor and the end client from a human level, which I think is, as good of an example of how important that is as anything.
Well, it's a business built on trust. It's a business on relationships. That's the key, and I think that's what we're hearing from you.
Yeah, this business is all about trust. Sometimes I tell that part of my origin story too. Is I actually worked on one of Bernie Madoff's cases, and that's what sent me into this business was the abuse of trust there.
Oh,
we're one of the least trusted professions out there. And so for us to be great as a whole industry, as a whole profession, we need to shift that paradigm from one of the least trusted to one of the most trusted, because what we do is we help people achieve that financial freedom. We help them sleep better at night. achieve their aspirations, dreams, and goals. And the only way we're going to do that is if they actually trust us, not just us, but all of us, right? Like that's what's important. Also, this being a profession instead of an industry, because we have to raise that standard for all Americans so they believe they're entitled to this type of advice.
Awesome. Jamie, thank you so much for joining us today. Words of wisdom. Really appreciate your time. Appreciate your insights. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Grow Organically podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Visit catchlight.ai, where you can access all our podcasts, including show notes and other resources to keep learning. This podcast was produced by Catchlight Insights, LLC. It is for informational and educational purposes only. The content of this podcast does not constitute an offer or recommendation of any securities and is not intended to provide tax, legal, or investment advice. The views expressed are those of the speakers and not necessarily those of Catchlight or its affiliates, and are as of the date indicated, based on the information available at that time, and may change based on market or other conditions. Catchlight does not assume any duty to update any of the information. Catchlight Insights LLC is an affiliate of Fidelity Investments. However, Catchlight and other third parties mentioned in the podcast are independent entities and not affiliated. Catchlight does not endorse any investment advisor or provide advice or recommendations to any prospective or existing client of an investment advisor as to the selection or retention of that investment advisor. The information is not intended for any person or entity in any jurisdiction where the distribution or use of such information would be contrary to local law. Third-party trademarks referenced herein are the property of the respective owners. All others are the property of Catchlight Insights, LLC, copyright 2024 Catchlight Insights, LLC. All rights reserved.